Have you ever wondered where your water comes from? It's just something that we assume will always be there. We turn on the faucet and there it is. But water is all around us. It fills all of the local lakes, rivers, and streams. It is also underground and fills our oceans. Nearly 3/4 of our planet is covered in water, and we use that water. We use it for all our daily activities and for our recreational and business needs. We drink it, we cook with it, we use it to clean, we swim in it, we skate on it in the winter, and we harness its power. We use it for heating and for cooling. We use water every single day. But rarely do we slow down enough to appreciate, understand, and be conscious of our activities in and around our water. Because it is everywhere we live, work, drive, or play, we affect the purity and availability of our water every single day.
A lot of people, I don't think, ever take the time to walk a stream. You have like unbelievable areas that haven't been touched. It's like an amazing thing, and then you go down a little ways where you have a lot of development, then you have areas where you can definitely tell there's been a human impact.
What we have found across the board is that we have some wonderful water systems in town, and we have some areas we can definitely improve. It usually is correlated directly to the amount of disturbance in the area. An area of an open space or a protected land, you're going to find a visual representation of a higher water quality.
Here in the Northeast, we have our share of challenges in balancing the needs of farming, industry, recreation, and habitat. For hundreds of years, homes, farms, mills were built adjacent to our watercourses, and even in areas that were once wetlands. We have come a long way in our town and many towns throughout the country since the days of neglect and direct discharge of pollutants into our streams, lakes, and oceans from manufacturing facilities. Yet we are still not immune to the shortages of clean water that face too many places in our world.
And everything is related. There is nothing which is unrelated or is related only to itself and has no impact on the rest of our environment. Everything we do has some impact.
Our real work here is connecting with people, human health, and the benefit of our community with doing the right thing environmentally. The surface water quality issue being so closely tied to our own health through our drinking water concerns and, of course, our enjoyment of the outdoors. The protection of public lands and forested lands and the use of those lands by every citizen in Newtown is something that benefits everybody in Newtown. The fact that we are a part of a community and we share this resource and everybody's downstream of the next person.
Today we're going to explore and learn about our most vital resource, clean water. Through our journey, we will ask critical questions like, where does our water come from? What are the threats to our clean water? What are we doing to protect our water? And more importantly, what can you do to keep our water clean? The Putatuck River, fed by Deep Brook and several other tributaries, flows through our town and empties into Lake Zor near the Silver Bridge along the border of Southbury. This small river, flowing only through Newtown, is the veritable lifeblood of our community. The water in the river and water that sits beneath our feet provides clean, cold drinking water for roughly half our town's population. As we start to explore the threats to our water and how our community is organizing to protect it, we must first look at where we get our water and how it cycles through nature before arriving at our tap. As children, we learn about the water cycle. The watershed works as an interconnected system made up of not only the visible streams, lakes, and swamps, but also the meadows, forests, lawns, gardens, and even miles of paved roads in our town. A stream or river only represents the surface of a watershed system.
The fact that every watercourse in town, particularly within the stratified drift aquifer of the Putatuck watershed, is nothing more than the excess water being squeezed out of a sponge. So understanding the interactive nature between that surface water and what's in the sponge is very important.
There are 8 watersheds in Newtown. There's the Pequannock River watershed, the Pond Brook River watershed, the Aspetuck River watershed, the Limekiln River watershed, the Deep Brook River watershed, the Putatuck River watershed, the Housatonic River watershed. So they all play their own little parts as an important public drinking water source with regards to public water and private wells.
When you're looking at it, this is a cross-section of the the crystalline bedrock, and where the soft areas are, the glacier was able to dig out, and everything that got filled in and then reworked by the rivers, like the Putatuck River, is kind of what we're looking at today. So the subsurface water actually directly relates to the surface water. So you cannot divide one from the other. You have the rivers that you see actually are coming up from underground. And when you dump something out in your backyard, it actually does relate to the water quality in general.
The Department of Environmental Protection has identified and designated over 120 aquifer protection areas within the state of Connecticut. The designation of these areas limits the types of land uses allowed in order to allow for better recharge of the aquifer. However, any well that serves less than 1,000 people is not covered under these regulations, and therefore most people with private wells have to monitor their own. The Putatuck Aquifer was recognized as the sole source of drinking water for the residents of Newtown in March 1999 as a result of a petition submitted by State Representative May Schmidl.
Groundwater recharge is a hydrologic process where water moves downward from surface water to groundwater. Groundwater is recharged naturally by rain and snowmelt. Recharge may be impeded by human activities, including paving and development.
Our clean water is dependent upon our land and the critical interactions we have with it. Since the Putatuck Aquifer alone supplies cool, clean drinking water for nearly half of the 27,000 residents in Newtown every day, it is vital that we take good care of it. How we care for it and what activities we engage in directly affects our own health and the many species which rely on this same resource. The Putatuck River is one of only 8 other streams in the state of Connecticut which is deemed Class 1 water quality by the DEP, as it can sustain native trout populations from year to year. This classification is under siege over the past few years.
We also had an oil spill here. We had some buildings here being used as town offices, and there was an external oil tank and 5,000 gallons or so spilt onto the pavement, then into the storm drain system. The entire storm drain system for this site, this huge campus, goes 500 yards across the road and dumps directly into Deep Brook. It's a punctuation on the direct impact that this facility and anything we do up here has on our environment and our local waterways.
For most residents and businesses in the center of our town, the wastewater from toilets and drains is processed at our wastewater treatment plant. This facility is highly effective at removing most of the impurities found in the dirty water. The treatment plant's job, like the septic system at your house, is to clean the effluent water of most of its impurities. However, the natural microbial activity, which breaks down these substances, is not always able to do so when faced with new and combined materials we inundate it with on a daily basis.
We have had a couple of cases where we started to run into large numbers of polluted wells in a specific area, and eventually ended up doing a water project where we installed individual water lines connecting to the public water supply. And that's happened on a number of occasions, including our own public works garage. It's unfortunately not uncommon in a town that's considered a rural town to still have cases of pollution that require some, in some cases, pretty drastic solutions to solve them.
Here's the outflow from the wastewater treatment plant. All the water processed by the plant enters the stream right here. We do significant monitoring above and below, water sampling, macroinvertebrate sampling twice a year. We're just starting to see the impacts of those things in the waste stream, which come from pharmaceuticals that are being dumped down toilets They're not processed by the body and end up in our wastewater. And the detergents that we use, that all end up in the wastewater. And although the phosphates and nitrates and all those things are processed out at the wastewater plant, there are things such as the chemicals, the household cleaning chemicals, the pharmaceuticals that are still in this water and entering our waterways.
It's a whole drug and used or no longer used drug activities. Pharmaceutical vendor, they suggest that they be flushed down the toilet. If you happen to be on a wastewater treatment facility, they go into the wastewater treatment facility and they're probably not removed, because wastewater treatment facilities, unless they're very specially designed, would typically not remove those kinds of materials. So they go out into the watershed.
We don't want people flushing pharmaceuticals. That's something that has really come to light recently, that we have seen residual pharmaceuticals in water quality data. We do periodically have collections here in town.
Recent research has shown that many common soaps and the plastics which they are sold in have been found to mimic hormone disruptors, which cause malformations in frogs and fish. Called endocrine disruptors, or EDS, such chemicals have been linked in animal studies to a variety of problems, including cancer, reproductive failure, and developmental anomalies. Doctors at the Mount Sinai Medical Center in New York say that phthalates, which also appear on ingredient lists of around 70% of shampoos, cosmetics, and soaps, could be endocrine disruptors and should be avoided wherever possible. The Mount Sinai researchers also warned against bisphenol A, a substance present in many food containers and plastic water and baby bottles. These are indicated by a number 7 printed on the base.
We now know that some of these chemicals, in fact, do reside in a lot of the fish that we've always considered to be healthy. The Housatonic River, which is alongside of us, the famous case of PCBs in the fish in that river that came from an engine plant in Pittsfield, Mass. We're still cleaning up the Housatonic and will be for decades to come. The whole food chain has been impacted by chemicals that don't always break down quickly or easily and end up in our diet or in our drinking water.
Bioaccumulation is the increase in the concentration of substances in a living organism over time as they are each in turn consumed up the food chain, having taken in contaminated food, water, and air.
Over time, the increase in population, housing, buildings, and other development has put a strain on our clean water, not only because there is a greater demand for it, but also an increase in activities that may compromise the quality of our water. As we cover more land with hard surfaces, less of the water is able to soak into the aquifer from which we draw our drinking water. More of it flows immediately to our rivers, carrying with it a stew of potential pollutants: oil from parking lots, pesticides from our yards, salts from our roads, and soil from construction sites are just a few of the ingredients.
We are still in the process of testing for and cleaning up from harmful and persistent residues left behind at old manufacturing facilities and at our town-owned properties. Some chemicals, after being spilled or disposed of, will last for many years. Even in small amounts, they can cause water and soil pollution.
A wetlands enforcement officer is, on the ground, works with the regulations of the town and the people who have to live with them day to day. So my job's to go out and check out the properties, check out the open space, the permits, and the plans, the people that haven't had their approvals yet, in order to see how they comply with the regulations. A lot of times people think they're just cleaning up or they're just recreating, and what happens is that the wetlands are very damaged by that.
Again, the problem comes up, and always with land use, with wetlands, with everything, is people's personal right to do what they want to do. And we deal with that all the time. Somebody owns a piece of property, they have a house, they feel they can do whatever they want with that piece of property. And we have to explain to them, no, you can't. You have to do this. You have to build your house here. You can't build it right on the property line. You can't build it in the wetlands. You have to build it over here. And that we do have control over. 95% of the people really want to do something. When they're confronted saying, you're hurting the environment, and they can do it, without a major impact to their life, they're gonna do it.
Like many places, the historic growth of our town included activities like filling wetlands that made spaces, quote, more usable. We drew upon the rivers for their power. We settled our downtowns along the water and constructed manufacturing plants where local people made things. We also dumped our waste back into the rivers where it was carried to someplace else. We did all of this without much regard or even understanding of the potential harmful consequences.
In 1991, the Clean Water Act 2 came through, was passed by Congress, that states adopt new water quality standards, where it used to be that our water was the thing that we wanted off the roads. Roads are designed to move water off them as quickly as possible. So these were our dumping grounds. The rivers were the place that you put water as quickly as possible, whatever the level or quality of it was. And what we call end pipe pollution. Now, end pipe had to do with the big industries where the glowing green goop was coming out of the end of the pipe. Those were easy to identify because those were hot spots. Our new water quality standards have to do with what's called death by 1,000 paper cuts. We don't have one space that's giving all the pollution or all the sediment that's running into the streams and having to do with water quality issues, but we have lots of them.
Dieldrin, an organophosphate insecticide used in the 1960s and 70s, is still being monitored at Fairfield Hills as it is persistent in the soil and even at low levels, 9 to 12 parts per trillion, can be damaging. The Noranda Forge Fin site in town, off of Mile Hill South, has just begun an initial cleanup process of chemical solvents which will take 10 years to complete.
To the extent that we can control the flow that goes into the groundwater is the aquifer. And that's the water that we need to preserve and use, both in terms of quality and quantity, for the future of Newtown. We get, I think, more than half of our drinking water and water that's used out of that Putatuck aquifer.
Scott, Charlo, and I created an idea to do an impervious surface analysis on the town of Newtown. There was a boom in Newtown from 2002 to 2006 of development. From that, we started our impervious surface analysis with breaking up the 8 watersheds that are in town. 10% is kind of like the threshold for where sensitive watersheds become impacted. The impervious surfaces that we're including are buildings, pools, driveways, roads, patios, sheds, any type of structure of that nature.
The fact that we have areas in town with compromised water quality has many people on edge, and we are working together, often behind the scenes, to research, remediate, educate, and legislate to solve these problems.
I think that's the main thing. You don't tell people what to do. You try to work with them and try to come up with something that'll work. Working with the developers and working with the Department of Public Works people to come up with solutions. That type of thing is not a monetary type of thing. It's a time commitment type of thing. And it's a philosophical, I guess, type of thing, too. You have to really be involved in the environment, not just in your town, but across town borders. And again, everything we do goes into the Housatonic River that goes downstream and impacts other people.
Whenever possible, don't buy products which are packaged in harmful plastics, made with non-biodegradable materials, or dispose of these materials in a way which leads back to our drinking water. Lawn care, personal care products, and household cleaners are of particular concern.
Another important thing for homeowners to remember is that they should routinely pump out their septic systems. You know, their septic system consists of a tank that does some primary treatment and settling of solids for their wastewater that comes out of their home, and then the liquid or the leachate that leaves that tank goes into the fields where it further gets renovated. But it's important to pump out that tank on a regular basis every 2 to 4 years, depending on how many people are in the home and how often, how it heavily is being used.
In 1999, the National Resources Defense Council published a report, Bottled Water, Pure Drink or Pure Hype. Over 1,000 bottled water samples were tested and compared to bottled water standards established by the Food and Drug Administration. About 1/3 of the waters tested contained levels of contamination, including synthetic organic chemicals, bacteria, and arsenic that exceeded allowable limits under either state or bottled water industry standards or guidelines. In fact, about 1/4 of bottled water is actually bottled tap water, according to government and industry estimates. Some estimates go as high as 40%.
Twice a year, the Candlewood Valley chapter of Trout Unlimited, along with the town of Newtown and the DEP, performs sampling of local streams for aquatic insects, which are the food source for native brook trout and brown trout. These same trout and the food source they rely on are strong indicators of water health in our streams.
There are ongoing restoration efforts for people of all ages and abilities to participate in. Contact the Land Use Agency in your town for more information. Some of the largest positive impacts to our water quality have come from project partnerships, which have brought together many school, religious, town agencies, conservation groups, and interested people in town.
We probably had about 75 volunteers help us plant several hundred trees and shrubs in this floodplain area. We removed the invasive plants. All of these trees you see here were all a part of this restoration project.
When the volunteers get out there, they're just having a genuinely good time, knowing that they will come back in years and see a grove of trees there. And so we have this very rich resource that we are proud of, and it gives us our clean drinking water.
I'm in 8th grade at Newtown Middle School, and we're doing an 8th grade independent science project, and I decided I wanted to do something with the brook since I live nearby. You're supposed to write an essay on an experiment you did, and I've learned so much about the bugs and the different types and how it has to do with the water quality around, and it definitely has a lot of impact on what the town has to do with the brook.
And we work with this in conjunction with the state of Connecticut. They use this actually to make a report to the federal government with respect to the quality of water in Connecticut. And if you look at this first two columns, or first two rows, so if you go in and you do a sampling and you find lots of these most desirable, you know you've got some pretty high quality water. If all you find are the least desirable, then you know that the water quality could well be impaired.
As a 6th grader in our town, every student learns about and raises trout through a program called Trout in the Classroom, sponsored by Trout Unlimited. I got to do it when I was in 6th grade, and it was fun. And I learned a lot about water and how sensitive fish are in their environment. As guardians of our planet, we need to be in charge, and we need to continually protect our most basic resource. It takes a little bit of effort on everyone's part to keep our water clean and abundant for all to share.
There's enough information in this program that you could use it and support the 6th grade teaching program throughout the year. The kids come in here, they measure pH, they measure nitrates, they measure nitrites, they measure temperature, they measure clarity, they evaluate scent, count the eggs. I mean, they know these fish very, very closely.
A lot of these kids go home and play video games or sit inside, and this process has helped them sort of understand that there are other living beings out there that we impact. I'm really excited that curiosity is building, and then as they grow and as we get closer to the release, we'll start talking about the environment more toward the end of the year, and how this population represents other populations of animals in our environment.
Diligently protecting open space assures that the land which cleans our water can continue to do so, without the added threats of development and impervious surfaces.
We can no longer look from property line to property line without consideration of the larger context to all our neighbors. As we begin to realize that everything really is connected, we begin to see how every little bit that we can do to help does go a long way to help keep our local water clean.
One of the things our involvement with the Pawtucket Watershed Association has done is help the town formulate a water study throughout the entire town. One of the other long-term benefits that this tool may be able to provide the town as a whole is an ability to identify larger areas of open space that's currently undeveloped, to identify whether or not there's key critical areas that really do need to be put aside for protection. And if we don't start to think about the undeveloped tracts of land today and the impact that the development may have by building those out, it could have a detrimental health to the water system that we have and the water supply we have in town.
We at the Newtown Forest Association have undertaken a proactive approach to most of our properties to identify what is on there as far as natural resources, and also to take it a step further and walk over the fence and meet abutting property owners. Because what abutting property owners do to their property directly affects us, just like what we do to our property affects the town property, water courses, forest health, etc.
In traditional landscape design, we think in terms of property lines, the 2-acre property that the client owns. And yet a fox or a salamander has no idea where a property line is. And I really wish people could think more in terms of habitats and region, a watershed. It's very much in the context of land that is owned by neighbors and even other community members farther away.
The new stormwater construction techniques help to clean and slow down dirty flow water following a storm event. These methods have been utilized on several notable projects in our town recently and can also be used in the residential setting. In most places where a pipe or water ditch is proposed, these techniques are effective and in many cases less expensive to install. How we care for our properties can also make a big impact. The use of native plants and abiding by the wetland setbacks are an easy way to foster good stewardship of our landscape. Instead of huge expanses of mowed grass, consider creating a more diverse meadow or grassland area, which requires far less inputs and will help filter the runoff from roadways, parking lots, and turf or agricultural fields. Moreover, they provide critical habitat for our native songbirds, butterflies, insects, and other species.
A lot of times we'll be at the Pawtucket Watershed Group and I'll mention something should be done, and the next day someone will be basically doing it before we even have a chance to think about it. Our infrastructure is getting old, and over the years we've tended to build upon the systems without retrofitting the end of the system. From that, we'll be able to hopefully go back and redesign some areas. If you put in a new stormwater system, you're immediately improving the water quality going into the river. I think we have more people for the environment than in the past 20 years that I've experienced in my career. So I think that we have an opportunity to do things. I think the sentiment is going that way, to work with the environment.
The many chemicals available to the consumer are known carcinogens or otherwise harmful. We have to urge our government to stop allowing pollution of our environment. It should not be the sole responsibility of the consumer to make the right decisions.
More and more people have been drawn to our town for the natural beauty, interesting history, wonderful schools, and uncommon sense of community. We are fortunate to have a dedicated group of town employees and elected officials, volunteers, educators, scientists, professionals that work to balance the growing needs of the town with pressure to increase economic development.
We've come a long way in the last decade and have a whole new set of tools to help us monitor, analyze, and correct our past mistakes, with the knowledge that we have stalwartly slowed further degradation to our life source, water.
We all need to act now, and we need to get to know our water and make good daily choices which help protect our water which all life forms rely on.